talking about weed. In our plant crops, when we grow our plant crops, there's always a weed that grows alongside with it. So what's this weed? Does this weed have an economic importance to our crops, or how does this weed affect our crops? And what are the mode of dispersal for this weed? That's all we'll be learning in our today's class. Stay tuned and let's go to class fully. What is weed? Weed is any plant that grows in a place where it is not expected to grow, or a plant which grows out of place. Why are you growing here? Why are you staying here? That's just a weed. When a particular plant is growing out of place. Weed can also be defined as a plant that grows where it is not desired in such a place, in such a way that it constitutes nuisance either to the human, livestock, or to the crops in particular. So we know it's a plant that grows where it is not expected to, and this weed constitutes nuisance to either to the animal or to the mammals or to the crop. All farmers have to work hard to prevent their crops from being invaded by weeds. Losses in crop yield due to weed may be greater than those due to the plant's pests and diseases. What this trying to tell us is, farmers, they work very hard to prevent their crops from being invaded by weeds, and the loss of crops yield, the crops they lost through weed may even be more than those they lost through pests and diseases. We don't know that this weed can cause a huge loss on a plant or on a particular farmland. If we want to weigh the amount of how the weeds invade a particular farmland and the amount of how they control pests and diseases, we'd have to see that the weeds itself constitutes a big nuisance to our plant crops than those of the plant pests and disease. If a farmer fails to control weed growth, the chances of successful crop production have seriously reduced. If a farmer fails to control the growth of weed on his farmland, the chances of a successful crop production is very, very low. What are the effects and or the economic importance of weeds? We say weeds are unwanted plants growing in an unwanted area. Then what are the economic importance of it, or what are the effects of it? Number one is weeds compete with crops for space. When a young plant is developing, weeds rapidly crowd the crop, and the space needed for LD is reduced. Compete for space. When a particular, maybe our maize plant now is being planted, then the weeds grows rapidly with it, and the space at which the maize plant is supposed to use, then the weed is already using the space, and with that it shortens the yield we get in return, because the space is not enough for our particular crop to grow with. When you are managing a little space, maybe this particular place I'm standing, there's another person that's fatter than me that is standing beside me. I won't feel convenient sharing a little space with someone. That is how these crops feel. When this particular space is for a maize plant and a weed is staying beside it, they are sharing that space. It will be convenient for it, and it reduces the yield we get in return for our crops. Another one is weeds compete with crops for sunlight. Weeds are capable of producing many large leaves with shade crop seedlings, and therefore reduce the amount of sunlight which is available for photosynthesis. As they compete for space, they also compete for sunlight. And these our weeds, they are always capable of having a large leaves, and all these large leaves they'll form a shade and this shed is not useful. Like if the shed of our weed is covering our own plants that needs this sunlight for photosynthesis, it will be difficult for us to get a good product from it when they compete with it for sunlight. Another one is wheat competes with crops for nutrients. The roots of wheat rapidly develop and remove the considerable portions of the available plant nutrients, thereby reducing the healthy growth of our plants. As the wheat competes for space, they compete for sunlight, they also compete for nutrients. And the roots of all these weeds are very developed. They develop rapidly compared to the plants we grew on them. And once their roots develop rapidly, like it moves the considerable amount of plant nutrients in the particular soil, which means if the weed is taking let's say 70% of the plant nutrients on that particular soil that is meant for a plant, if the weed is taking 70% of it, and so which means 30% left is for the plants will actually grow on that soil. How possible it is? How do we expect to have a good yield in return for it? He said if this weed have taken the available nutrients, like all of it, 70% of the available nutrients on that particular soil, it reduces the healthy growth of our plants. It reduces it rapidly. Another one is wheat arbors, crop pests and diseases. Like this weed, they serve as shelter for our crop pests and disease. And most of the diseases don't have effect on most of our weeds, but on that particular crop plant, that is where they have effect on. And these our crop plants, these our pests and disease, they use the weed as a shelter to have effect on our crop plants. This weed will serve as hosts, and by this they provide insect food when crops are unavailable. When this particular crop is just growing rapidly and the wheat has already grown to the weeds have already grown, and this particular crops that we plant on it is not like it's just coming up, it's just developing little by little. The pests and disease, they use these weeds as a shelter. So they provide the food the pest will feed on. This weed provides it. Then once our plant crop develop, then they move back on it. Do you understand now how these weeds arbors crop pest and disease? Another one is wheat competes with crops for soil nutrients, for the soil moisture. Their roots are capable of developing fast and removing a large portion of the soil moisture required for the normal growth of the plant. We said it earlier in one of the economic importance that the wheat competes with crops for nutrients. So that has they compete with the soil for moisture also, and because of how their roots develop rapidly, so they remove a large portion of the soil moisture, which requires nothing for the particular plants we want to grow on. Another one is losses in crop yield. The combined competition of wheat and crop eventually will result in low yield. If they compete for sunlight, if they compete for the soil moisture, they compete for the soil oxygen, they compete for nutrients, they compete for almost everything that the main crop plant needs, then there will be a really loss in our crop yield. There's no how we would have a crop yield when the weeds are already taking over 70% of our plant's nutrients. They're taking 70% of the sunlight. When they are taking 70% of our soil nutrients, so what's left for the main plants to feed on? This is how it results in a big loss in our crop yield. Another one is which competes with the crop for soil oxygen, which are capable of developing long roots, which remove considerable amount of oxygen required for crop root respiration. They compete again with our crop for soil oxygen. Because of this their long roots, and this long roots develop rapidly, like it is just fast, and they remove a considerable amount of this oxygen, and this oxygen is really needed in our crop roots for respiration. But since this weed have taken almost everything, then there's nothing left for our crops to use to be able to grow. Losses in quality of the crops. We say losses in the crop yield. Now this is another loss in the quality of the crop. The quality of harvested crops will reduce, and this will affect the market value of such crops. Let's say for this particular maize we are planting on this particular soil, we are supposed to get a maize as big as this my hand from it, but because the weed has compete for all the nutrients, all the soil oxygen, all the soil moisture, the sunlight, the weed has compete with the plant crops for it. There are little nutrients left for the main crops to feed on, to have a good yield, to have a good quality. There's no how a crop can have a good quality when all the nutrients you need has been taken away from you by a weed. That's what brings about the losses in the quality of crops. Another one is losses in the income of farmers. When there is already a low yield, there's already loss in the quality of the crop, then what is left for the farmer to hold on to? The farmer has nothing to hold on to when what is supposed to feed on has been taken away by the weeds. The low yield coupled with the reduction in the quality of produce and the increase in the cost of controlling this weed consequently leads to losses in the income of the farmers. Because of the amount of the when there is low in the yield, and then when there's reduction in the quality of the produce, when there's even reduction in the quality of the produce, and there's also increase in the cost of you want to control this weed, it's eventually leads to losses in the income of the farmers, because you have to control this, you have to spend money on it, and even the yield you want to get in the return has been reduced just because of the weed. And even the produce that, okay, if this can't go, then I should be able to get a quality produce from it, and there's the quality produce and the produce didn't come out well, it serves as loss. It leads to losses in the income of the farmers. Another one is reduction in the palatability of some grasses. Weeds also invade pasture, reducing the palatability of useful grasses. Because these weeds, they compete with everything, and most of these weeds even mix. It will even be hard for you to identify the weeds the particular plant that is weeds and the particular plant that is really useful for our human health. It's very difficult to identify it, and they invade the pastures that are meant for our farm animals. They invade it, that's how they reduce the palatability of the useful grasses. You can't even know if this grass is useful or not because they invade everything. Some weeds are toxic to farm animals. The leaves and stem of some weeds contain toxins which may be dangerous to farm animals. Some weeds are poisonous that would be very dangerous to our farm animals, and the farm animals must not even feed on them. Some animals must not even smell those leaves. They are very toxic to them, and those are these weeds that grows among our pastures. Some farmers might not even know, and they might just fetch them all from the from their from their nurseries, and the outcome of it will be very toxic to the farm animals. However, some weeds are still useful to the farmers in the following ways. Even after they have to compete for this, compete for the nutrients, compete for the soil moisture, compete for soil oxygen, there are still some that are still useful for the for our farmers. And what are these usefulness? Some weeds can act as cover crops. Some are used as forage grasses and legumes for feeding our farm animals. Some of all these weeds are useful. They are useful. They can be used as grasses and legumes for our farm animals to feed on. And some are used to prepare compost and green manure. Some of these weeds can be gathered together, then you dry them, then you make them as a green manure. Some weeds can help to control soil erosion. You can plant a particular weed in a particular field, and it will help you control the soil erosion, the rate at which water, like it's even able to control flood, like that's its erosion. Characteristics and growth habits of some weeds. Weeds often possesses characteristics which increase their growth habits and mode of dispersal. Some factors which aid the growth habits of weeds include: number one factor is the production of large quality of seeds. Some weeds produce seeds. Some weeds reproduce by seeds, and if you see a particular weed that reproduces by seeds, it is always continuous. It's always continuous. If this one is going, then there would always be another seed in the soil that would even grow afterwards. That's why it reproduces by seeds. Another one is some weeds reproduce by vegetative propagation, is from their stem, their roots, and their leaves. Some reproduce by that, so they reproduce by their stem, their roots, and their leaves too. Growth of large leaves within a short time, because they grow in a short time, so they produce a large leaves, which some of these large leaves even would use as a shed for some of our plant crops that which won't make them have a minimum amount of sunlight. Wheat growth is favored during the rainy season. During rainy season, now, it favors the wheats. They grow rapidly during rainy season. Even, let's say, for a maize plant now, it takes at least 4 weeks for a particular maize plant to start developing. Between that week one, the week you planted the crop, and to the 4th week that you start seeing your maize, the wheat has already grown to a matured stage. And this is just because of the rainy season. When we have a continuous rainfall, it speeds up the growth rate for particular crops, and it speeds up the growth rate of our wheat also. Most wheats are wind pollinated, they are controlled by wind. Another one is production of large quantities of pollen grains. Wheat produce a large quantity of pollen grains, which increases their growth habits. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much for listening. In our next video, in our next class, we're talking about the mode of dispersal of this wheat and some types of wheats. Thank you very much.